Motivation fades, but winners keep moving. Success isn't born from how you feel, but from what you do when you're exhausted. Success starts when you're tired. How to win without motivation. If you enjoy these motivational audiobooks, hit like and subscribe, and join the 1% Club on this channel, because I know for a fact you're not an average Joe. Also, let me know where you're listening from, and the time there in the comments below. It's always cool to see. Now let's begin. Chapter 1. The Mythology of Endless Energy. The coffee maker broke at 5:23 a.m. on the very day I was supposed to launch the biggest project of my last 3 years. Not exactly the cinematic morning of triumph I had imagined. I just stood there in my kitchen, staring at the puddle of water spreading across the counter, my eyes heavy, my body weighed down with exhaustion that felt older than my bones. I'd been running on scraps of sleep for weeks, late nights, early mornings, caffeine on repeat, convincing myself this was the price of success, that the grind, the endless push, the constant go, was proof that I was on the right path. But in that moment, in the pre-dawn silence, something shifted. It wasn't a lightning bolt of inspiration or the kind of motivational epiphany you read in glossy magazine success stories. It was the opposite kind of click. The quiet, unsettling kind. The realization that maybe I'd been buying into a lie that was draining me dry and sabotaging my ability to achieve anything meaningful. The lie was simple. That success demands constant motivation, boundless energy, and waking up every morning feeling unstoppable. That the winners are the ones who jump out of bed fired up, who grind through obstacles with endless enthusiasm, who never hit the wall of fatigue or doubt. But here's what that broken coffee maker forced me to confront. The truth. The most successful people I've met, admired, or studied aren't the ones who have endless energy. They're the ones who have figured out how to win without it. We live in a culture obsessed with peak performance. Social media paints a picture of entrepreneurs who thrive on 4 hours of sleep and claim they love every minute of it. Athletes who say training feels like passion, not discipline. Creators who insist they're energized by their work instead of drained by it. It sounds inspiring, but it feeds what I call the energy myth. The belief that the successful few have tapped into some secret reservoir of unstoppable motivation, and the rest of us are just too weak, too inconsistent, too ordinary to find it. The truth is far less glamorous, but infinitely more useful. Success isn't about having more energy. It's about learning to operate when your tank is empty. It's about showing up when your motivation is gone, when your body says, quit, when the voice in your head whispers, why bother? And here's the uncomfortable twist. Real success isn't measured by what you do when you feel great. It's measured by what you do when you feel terrible. I didn't learn this from books or seminars. I learned it the hard way, by spending years chasing motivation like it was the missing ingredient. I bought every productivity system. I tried every morning routine, every supplement, every biohack, promising me endless energy. But chasing motivation is like chasing happiness. The more desperately you chase it, the more it slips through your fingers. The more you wait to feel ready, the less you actually do. And the more you depend on perfect conditions, the less progress you make. That broken coffee maker? That was the start of my awakening. Because instead of losing the morning, I made a choice. A small one, but powerful. I decided not to scramble for a fix, not to drive to the cafe, not to rewrite my whole routine. I chose to carry on, to work without the ritual I thought I needed, to move forward without the energy I thought was essential. And what happened next was shocking. I actually got more done that day than I had in weeks. Not because I was inspired, not because I felt good, but because I stopped wasting time chasing the perfect state and just executed. That's when I stumbled on what I now call the exhaustion advantage. When you're too tired to overthink, you act. When you're too drained to second guess, you follow the plan. When you're too worn out to obsess about outcomes, you focus on the process. Strangely enough, exhaustion stripped away the noise. It made me sharper, more consistent, less entangled in emotion. It showed me that fatigue wasn't the end of progress. It could be the beginning. Now, don't misunderstand me. This isn't about glorifying burnout or pretending sleep and health don't matter. It's about realizing that exhaustion, in small doses, can unlock something extraordinary. Discipline without drama. But here's where so many people, myself included, fall into the trap. For years, I believed progress required motivation. That I needed to feel inspired to move forward. That excitement was the fuel. And it sounds reasonable, doesn't it? Of course, we should feel energized about our dreams. Of course, we should be fired up about our purpose. But that's the trap. Because motivation is an emotion, and emotions are the least stable foundation you can build success on. They shift with sleep, with stress, with weather, with hormones, with headlines, with life. One bad night, one tough day, and suddenly your entire success strategy crumbles. I actually tracked it. For 6 months, I measured my motivation alongside my productivity, and what I found floored me. My most productive days? They often came when I felt my worst. My least productive? They often happened when I felt unstoppable. Why? Because when I felt motivated, I spent time savoring the feeling instead of acting on it. But when I felt drained, I had no choice but to lean on my systems. That's when it hit me. Success doesn't come from finding motivation. It comes from building systems that work without it. And here's where the science backs it up. Behavioral psychology shows us that action often comes before motivation, not after. You don't act because you feel motivated. You feel motivated because you acted. It's called the action-motivation loop, and it explains why waiting for inspiration leaves people stuck for years, while taking a single step, even when you don't feel like it, can ignite momentum. That's why Dr. B.J. Fogg's research at Stanford is so powerful. His tiny habits method doesn't rely on inspiration at all. It's about making progress so small that motivation doesn't matter. Floss one tooth, do one push-up, send one email. Small actions that bypass the need for enthusiasm and build unstoppable momentum. This isn't sexy, but it's liberating. Because it means you don't need to wait for energy, inspiration, or the stars to align. You just need to move, especially when you don't feel like it. The rest of that morning and the months that followed taught me something life-altering. Sustainable success isn't built on bursts of energy. It's built on showing up, tired, uninspired, and unready, but showing up anyway. Every time you act without motivation, you strengthen something deeper than discipline. Psychologists call it self-efficacy, your belief that you can execute even when you don't feel like it. And once you prove to yourself that you can write when you're tired, work when you're drained, or train when you're sluggish, you unlock an almost unfair advantage. You stop needing to feel good to do good work. That's when success becomes inevitable. I thought success required me to be superhuman. That morning, I learned the opposite. True success is about learning to be effectively human, to stop chasing the perfect state and start creating progress in the real one. Because at the end of the day, success doesn't start when you're inspired and ready to conquer the world. It starts when you're tired, unmotivated, and questioning everything. Yet you take action anyway. That's the day everything changes. Chapter 2. The system that works when you don't. The alarm went off at 5 a.m., just like it had every morning for the last 6 months. But this time, something was different. This time, I didn't move. I just lay there, staring at the ceiling, my chest heavy with a weight I couldn't quite name. The kind of weight that doesn't come from a bad night's sleep or a long week, but from something deeper. Something that had been quietly piling up for months. The presentation waiting for me at the office wasn't finished. The emails in my inbox had been multiplying like weeds I'd been too tired to pull. Projects and deadlines were stacked like bricks on my shoulders, heavier with every passing day. But here's the truth. None of it mattered to me in that moment. Not one thing. My body felt like it was made of stone, and my mind was clouded in a fog so thick that I couldn't even remember why I'd cared about any of this just weeks earlier. And let me be clear, this wasn't laziness. This wasn't procrastination. This was something else entirely. This was hitting the wall. Not the wall that runners talk about in mile 20 of a marathon, but a wall that shows up in your career, your relationships, your entire life. A wall that makes you question if you've been running in the wrong direction all along. Lying there at 5 a.m. with not a single ounce of motivation left in me, I stumbled onto the most valuable lesson of my professional life. The difference between systems that depend on you feeling good and systems that still work when you feel nothing at all. Because if your success depends on motivation, you're already set up to fail. That was the morning I began building what I now call zero-state systems. Habits and processes that don't need inspiration, don't need energy, don't even need hope. They work when you're at your best, but more importantly, they keep working when you're at your absolute worst. It started with one question, a kind of test I now use for every system in my life. Will this still function on the days I feel nothing? Most productivity hacks don't pass that test. They're built on the fantasy that you'll wake up every morning fired up about your goals, ready to conquer the world. But that's not real life. Real life is messy. Real life is 80% slog and only 20% spark. If your systems only work during the spark, you're doomed during the slog. So I stripped everything down to the smallest, most automatic behaviors I could create. Not the perfect version, not the optimized version, just the version that required the least energy to execute. For writing, that meant opening my laptop and typing one sentence. Not a good sentence. Not even a coherent one. Just a sentence. For exercise, it meant putting on gym clothes and walking to the building, even if I did nothing when I got there. For business, it meant sending one email. Not 10. Not the perfect one. Just one. Here's what I discovered. Starting is infinitely harder than continuing. That single sentence often led to a paragraph. That short walk often led to a workout. That one email often became 3 or 4. Momentum is contagious, but you only get it by lowering the bar enough to step over it when everything in you wants to lie down. But it wasn't just about the actions themselves. It was about reshaping my environment so that the easiest choice was the right choice. My desk stayed cleared, with a blank document already open. My gym clothes were laid out the night before. My phone wasn't even in the same room when I was working. And I went a step further. I engineered friction. If I wanted to waste time on social media, it now took 6 steps just to log in. If I wanted junk food, I had to dig past bags of almonds and fruit just to find it buried in the back of the fridge. The path of least resistance was no longer sabotage. It was survival. And then, perhaps the most important shift, I stopped measuring my days by big achievements. Instead, I designed what I called my minimum viable day. For me, that meant 100 words written, 10 minutes of exercise, 1 work task completed, and basic self-care. That was it. No matter how broken, tired, or uninspired I felt, if I hit those minimums, I counted the day as a win. Do you know how freeing that was? Suddenly, instead of failing to meet impossible expectations, I was winning small battles every single day. And those wins started to stack, slowly at first, then powerfully. It wasn't about doing everything. It was about doing something, consistently, even when I didn't want to. Because here's what nobody tells you. Passion doesn't come first. Action does. Meaning doesn't show up before the work. Meaning is created by the work itself. I didn't need more pep talks. I didn't need another motivational poster on my wall. I needed systems that worked in the absence of motivation. Systems that carried me when I couldn't carry myself. Systems that could withstand the storm of my worst days so I could keep going until the sun came back. And that's when it hit me. The true measure of any strategy isn't how well it works when you're on top of the world. It's how well it works when you feel like you've hit rock bottom. Because the systems that save you on your worst days, those are the ones that build your best ones. But the story doesn't end there. Because what happened next forced me to confront a truth even harder than the absence of motivation. It wasn't just about keeping myself moving forward. It was about redefining what progress actually means when life doesn't go the way you planned. And that realization would change everything. Chapter 3. The Art of Strategic Quitting. The resignation letter sat in my drafts folder for 3 weeks before I realized I was writing the wrong letter, and to the wrong person. It wasn't a letter to my team, or to my boss, or even to the project I'd spent 2 years of my life chained to. Number. It was a letter I needed to write to myself. The part of me that believed quitting was failure, that persistence was always virtue, that winners never walked away no matter how much it cost them. That realization didn't come in some dramatic boardroom meeting or a breakdown in traffic. It happened in the quietest of moments, me alone in the kitchen, the glow of the laptop screen flickering against a pile of empty coffee cups, my mind racing with justifications and excuses. And that's when it hit me. The most counterintuitive truth about success is this. Sometimes, the bravest, wisest, and most successful thing you can do is quit. Not recklessly, not as an escape, but strategically. With clarity, with purpose, with the understanding that your time, your energy, and your attention are just as valuable as any currency in the world. And once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it. We grow up worshiping persistence. The culture tells us, never give up. Winners never quit. You've heard it in graduation speeches, seen it plastered on motivational posters, passed down in family advice. We're raised on stories of underdogs who refused to surrender and ended up changing history. But here's the paradox. The very thing we're taught will make us successful often becomes the chain that holds us back. I call it the persistence paradox. The belief that if you let go of anything, you're weak. You're a failure. You're not cut out for greatness. I fell for it hard. 2 years into a project that was devouring my life, I told myself I couldn't quit. I'd invested too much. People were counting on me. What would everyone think if I walked away? I was stuck. Not because the project was still worth pursuing, but because my pride had me chained to it. But persistence without strategy isn't noble. It's just stubbornness dressed up as virtue. Commitment without evaluation, that's blindness and never giving up. It's only admirable if you're actually climbing the right mountain. Every choice comes with a cost. Time spent here is time you can't spend there. A yes in one direction is a silent no to everything else. I started to see it not as a philosophical idea, but as cold, hard math. That one project was swallowing up my hours, draining my health, and robbing me of opportunities that aligned more deeply with the future I wanted. The truth stung. By clinging to something mediocre, I was sacrificing the chance to build something meaningful. And here's the part that really forced me to rethink everything. Quitting isn't about weakness, it's about resource allocation. It's about asking, is this pursuit still the best use of my time, my energy, my life? Or am I holding on to it because I'm afraid of what quitting says about me? That question alone can change your life. Over time, I built what I now call my strategic quitting framework, a set of brutally honest questions I forced myself to ask. Does this still align with who I am and where I want to go? Am I making real progress, or just circling the same dead end? Have I learned what I needed to learn here? And, this is the big one, if I were offered this opportunity fresh today, would I still take it? Most of the time, the answer was no. The trap, of course, is the sunk cost fallacy, the voice in your head that says, but I've already put so much in. Money, time, reputation, pride. We've all been there. We keep feeding something that no longer feeds us, simply because of what we've already lost. But sunk costs don't come back. They're already gone. The only thing that matters is the future return. And if you wouldn't reinvest in it today, why are you still holding on? Here's the subtle part no one talks about. Quitting doesn't just challenge your projects, it challenges your identity. We tie who we are to what we do. I'm a lawyer. I'm a teacher. I'm someone who finishes what they start. And that identity, as much as it can give us strength, can also become a prison. That was me, sitting there, exhausted, chained to a project I didn't even believe in anymore, but unwilling to walk away because I'm not a quitter. It was only when I finally separated my identity from my commitments that I found freedom. I wasn't my projects. I wasn't my sunk costs. I was someone capable of making better choices for the person I was becoming. Not, the person I used to be. And the moment I accepted that, quitting stopped feeling like failure. It started feeling like liberation. Yes, people were surprised when I finally walked away. Some were disappointed. A few didn't understand. But most, they respected it. Some even admitted they were relieved for me, like they'd been waiting for me to make the decision I already knew was right. And here's the twist. Within weeks of quitting, I wasn't just free. I was thriving. I had the mental bandwidth, the energy, the creativity to start projects that truly aligned with my strengths and goals. And those projects didn't just feel lighter. They actually succeeded. All because I created space by walking away from what was draining me. Quitting strategically compounds in ways most people never realize. Each wrong thing you let go of creates room for multiple right things. Each strategic no multiplies your chances for a better yes. And with every smart exit, you get braver, wiser, more willing to take risks, because you know you can course correct without shame. And if you're wondering how to know when it's time, set your quitting criteria. Create your own benchmarks, timelines, and triggers. That way, when the moment comes, the decision isn't emotional, it's strategic. Because quitting isn't just about walking away, it's about walking away well. It's about leaving doors open, extracting the lessons, and carrying forward the relationships that matter. That's what I call the art of an elegant exit. 3 years after sending that resignation letter, I can say this with absolute certainty. Quitting was the best decision I ever made. Not because it was easy, but because it was right. That project eventually collapsed on its own, but by then, I was already building something better, stronger, truer to me. And here's the real truth. Quitting and failing are not the same thing. Failure is persisting at the wrong thing until you've exhausted yourself. Quitting strategically, that's success in disguise. Because when you stop pouring into what no longer serves you, you create space for what does. And sometimes, the most successful thing you can do is write that letter. Not to your team, not to your boss, but to the version of you who believed persistence was always a virtue, and quitting was always a sin. Because success isn't just about pushing through, it's about knowing when to stop. And if you've ever wondered whether it's time to quit, maybe that wondering is your answer. Chapter 4. The Discipline of Doing Less. The breakthrough didn't come in some quiet meditation retreat or from a motivational book. It came during my 4th consecutive day of working until midnight, when I finally realized I was busy destroying my own productivity in the name of being productive. I remember it clearly, standing in my home office at 11:47 p.m., 3 monitors glowing in the dark, 17 browser tabs open, 4 projects unfinished, and a to-do list that had ballooned from 12 items to 37 in a single week. My desk looked like a hurricane had swept through a productivity guru's workshop. My brain, it felt like an old dial-up connection trying to stream high-definition chaos. And in that moment, the truth finally landed. I wasn't working hard. I was working scattered. I wasn't being productive. I was being reactive. I wasn't accomplishing more by doing more. I was actually accomplishing less, by trying to do everything at once. What I stumbled onto that night wasn't another trick about time management or yet another hack for squeezing more hours out of the day. No, this was deeper, more fundamental. It was the discipline of doing less. Not laziness disguised as strategy, not avoidance of hard work, but the art of cutting away noise so the work that truly mattered could actually breathe. And here's the part nobody tells you. The most successful people you admire aren't the ones juggling the most. They're the ones who mastered the power of subtraction. They do fewer things, but they do them extraordinarily well. That realization made me question something that I think many of us quietly believe in. The myth that more equals better. We've been sold the idea that success is a numbers game. More hours, more projects, more meetings, more responsibilities. We hear it everywhere. If working 8 hours creates value, then 12 hours should create more value. If handling 3 projects is good, then managing 7 must mean you're really going places. Busy equals important, right? But here's the uncomfortable truth. that math doesn't hold up. Because your brain is not an infinite resource. It's not some machine that can handle unlimited tabs without slowing down. It's more like a high-performance sports car. It performs best when it's pointed in one direction and allowed to build momentum. That night, staring at my glowing monitors, I realized I'd been spending years treating my attention like it was limitless. And the cost? My work wasn't just diluted. It was broken into fragments so small that nothing meaningful was getting finished. And here's where it gets painful. I started tracking just how often I was switching between tasks in a single day. 43 times. 43. And every switch came with a hidden tax. A few minutes lost here. A few more there. And sometimes an entire mental thread that never fully returned. Think about that. Nearly 2 hours a day. Wasted, not on the work itself, but on recovering from my own constant shifting. Worse than the time was what scientists call attention residue. That sticky feeling when part of your brain is still caught on the last thing you were doing, even though you've moved on. Stack enough of those residues together and suddenly, you're not really anywhere. Not fully here, not fully there. Just half present everywhere. That's when it hit me. The goal isn't to get better at multitasking. The goal is to build the discipline to single task, to create the kind of focus that cuts through noise like a scalpel instead of swinging wildly like a dull axe. So I began what I now call the subtraction strategy. And let me tell you, it wasn't easy at first, because saying yes feels good. It makes us feel important, needed, valuable. But subtraction required me to become ruthless about what deserved my energy and what didn't. I did a commitment audit. Every project, every recurring meeting, every promise I'd made, even those casual obligations like always being available on email or jumping into every networking opportunity. For each one, I forced myself to ask 3 questions. Does this actually matter to my long-term goals? Or is it just keeping me busy? Am I the best person to do this? Or am I holding on to it just because I said yes once upon a time? Does this give me energy? Or does it quietly drain me? The results were sobering. Roughly 60% of my commitments failed at least one test, and a brutal 30% failed all 3. That meant I was spending the majority of my time not just on the wrong things, but on things that were actively pulling me away from the right ones. Of course, subtraction doesn't mean burning bridges overnight. That would have been reckless. So I developed what I call the graceful withdrawal protocol. Instead of just dropping responsibilities, I documented everything. Processes, contacts, context. Then I communicated openly with the people involved, letting them know why I was stepping back and, whenever possible, helping them find alternative solutions. I made gradual transition plans so nothing collapsed overnight. And sometimes, I even came up with creative ways to replace my involvement with something better than before. It took time and effort. But here's the surprising part. Every commitment I eliminated gave me back not just hours, but clarity. And clarity, my friend, is rocket fuel. What happened next? Well, I discovered something I now call the focus amplification effect. See, when you cut your workload from 7 projects to 3, you don't just gain time. You multiply your effectiveness. The work becomes richer, faster, deeper. You enter flow state more easily and stay there longer. Complex problems start to look solvable. Breakthroughs come faster. And here's the kicker. Progress compounds. Each day of focused effort builds on the last. Each week of momentum lifts the next. Before you know it, you're not just moving forward, you're accelerating. I could go on about finding the minimum effective dose, or the importance of energy budgeting, or the beauty of what I now call the simplification cascade. But here's the big picture. The discipline of doing less is not about doing nothing. It's about choosing depth over breadth. It's about liberating yourself from the illusion that busyness equals progress. Because the real opportunity cost of complexity isn't just missed tasks. It's missed mastery, missed relationships, missed potential. 6 months after that midnight revelation, I'd finished projects that had been stalled for years. I'd created more space in my days. But most importantly, I'd rediscovered something I hadn't felt in a long time. A sense of clarity. The discipline of doing less had given me more impact, more energy, more joy. And maybe that's the paradox we've all been running from. Success doesn't come from cramming your calendar until it breaks. It comes when you finally get tired of doing too much, and you have the courage to do less, better. Because the path to extraordinary results isn't through extraordinary effort applied everywhere. It's through ordinary effort, applied consistently to the few things that matter most. Chapter 5. The compound power of boring consistency. The spreadsheet that changed my life was the most boring document I'd ever created. Seriously. There were no revolutionary insights, no breakthrough strategies, no life-changing philosophies hiding in its cells. Just 365 rows and 12 columns. A year of checkboxes tracking whether I'd completed 12 painfully ordinary daily activities. Drink 8 glasses of water. Write 200 words. Walk 10,000 steps. Read for 20 minutes. Meditate for 5. The kind of list so mundane that if I told you about it at a dinner party, you'd probably laugh and think I'd lost my mind. That's it? That's your big system? But here's the twist. What I discovered wasn't about the spreadsheet. It wasn't about the water or the steps or the words. It was about something much deeper. Something that hides inside these boring, repetitive actions and quietly rewires who you become. See, I started this whole thing on January 1st with nothing but low expectations. I'd tried and failed with every flashy productivity framework out there. I'd chased big goals, written ambitious resolutions, and abandoned them all by February. So this time, I didn't expect fireworks. At best, I thought I'd get a little healthier, a little sharper, maybe a bit more productive. But 12 months later, I had stumbled onto something far more profound. The compound power of boring consistency. And I don't mean that in some motivational poster kind of way. I mean the kind of realization that punches you in the gut because it's so obvious, yet so invisible while you're living it. The way that the smallest, most unremarkable actions, done quietly, without applause, without visible progress, snowball into results that are anything but small or unremarkable. Here's the paradox. When you do those tiny actions in the moment, they feel like nothing. When you write 200 words, you don't feel like a writer. When you walk 10,000 steps, you don't feel like an athlete. When you meditate for 5 minutes, you don't feel enlightened. You feel ordinary. And that's the trap. That's why so many people give up. We're wired to chase what feels significant, even if it's not. We'd rather buy the new program, try the big diet, make the dramatic move, because those things feel like progress. Meanwhile, the boring actions that actually work feel too small to matter. I call it the consistency paradox. The actions that produce the most dramatic long-term change feel the least dramatic while you're doing them. I'll be honest. By month 3, I almost quit. The checklist had become automatic. I wasn't excited anymore. No rush of motivation. No sense of breakthrough. Just a bunch of ticked boxes. But then I reviewed the numbers. 90 days in, 18,000 words written, nearly 900,000 steps walked, 450 minutes of meditation logged. In 3 months, I'd done more writing than the entire previous year, more exercise than in 6 months, more meditation than my entire lifetime. That's when it hit me. Progress is invisible, until it isn't. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. That was the first time I realized boring consistency works like compound interest. It sneaks up on you. It feels flat, linear, forgettable day by day. But then it bends upward, and suddenly you're staring at results that don't even make sense compared to the effort you put in. Like the British cycling team that turned themselves from nobodies into world champions. Not by overhauling everything, but by getting just 1% better in dozens of small areas. Those tiny, boring improvements stacked on top of each other until the world couldn't ignore them anymore. And that's exactly what started happening in my life. Not because I pushed harder, but because I showed up consistently, at the smallest, most boring level possible. But here's where it gets really interesting. Consistency isn't just about habits. It's about identity. Every day you tick a box, you're not just completing a task. You're casting a vote for the person you want to become. That's why this works. Because the person who writes 200 words a day doesn't just write, they become a writer. The person who takes the daily walk doesn't just walk, they become an athlete. The person who meditates, even for 5 minutes, doesn't just breathe. They become someone who lives with more clarity and calm. Identity compounds, habits compound, systems compound. And when you combine them, you realize something almost nobody talks about. Boring consistency is actually a superpower. And yet, there's one more twist. One that most people never discover because they give up too soon. It's something I call the boredom advantage. And once you understand it, it changes everything. Because here's the uncomfortable truth. Boring might just be the most powerful thing you'll ever do. Chapter 6. The Mastery of Imperfect Action. The email sat in my drafts folder for 6 days. Every word scrutinized, every sentence rewritten, every paragraph restructured 4 times over, all in the pursuit of some impossible version of perfection. It was a simple business inquiry. 3 paragraphs. Nothing fancy, nothing high stakes. But there I was, frozen, trapped in that loop we all know too well. The loop where your brain convinces you that nothing you do is ever enough. On day 7, completely exhausted by my own perfectionism, I did something that felt almost radical. I sent the imperfect email. Not the perfect version I'd been obsessing over, not the polished masterpiece I'd been imagining, but the original, good enough version from day 1. 2 hours later, the reply landed in my inbox. Thanks for reaching out. Let's set up a call. And just like that, I learned one of the most liberating lessons of my professional life. Perfect is the enemy of done, and done is the enemy of never. That moment taught me something I still carry with me every day. The mastery of imperfect action is often more valuable than the ability to execute perfectly when conditions are ideal. Because here's the truth. The people who move the world aren't waiting for perfect timing, perfect skills, or perfect knowledge. They act decisively, with imperfect information, imperfect tools, imperfect timing. And then they learn, adapt, and iterate. I call it the perfectionism prison. Perfectionism wears the mask of virtue. It pretends to be high standards, meticulous attention to quality, a commitment to excellence. But underneath, it's fear. Fear of judgment, fear of criticism, fear of putting something imperfect into the world. And it convinces you that doing nothing is better than doing something less than perfect. I spent years locked in that prison, telling myself that taking time to get everything right was professional, that rushing to finish was sloppy, that extra effort to perfect was what separated me from mediocre people. But perfectionism isn't about quality. It's about hiding behind fear. Every unsent email, every unfinished project, every idea held back reinforces the belief that you can't act without perfect conditions. And the irony? Those conditions never come. That's where the 80-20 reality hits you like a brick. The Pareto principle shows that roughly 80% of results come from 20% of effort. In the context of perfectionism, the first version of your work often contains the majority of value. The remaining hours of obsessing over the final 20%? They add barely anything. For that email sitting in drafts, the first version had already captured 90% of the essential message. Yet I spent 6 days optimizing the remaining 10%. Time that could have been spent creating 5 other projects, capturing 80% of their value each. Here's the kicker. Imperfect action creates something perfect. Planning cannot. Feedback. Real-world feedback. When you release work, even imperfect work, you learn. You see what resonates. You see what flops. You adjust. You iterate. You grow. The email I finally sent didn't just get a meeting. It revealed exactly what the recipient needed, what mattered most to them, and how to approach the next step. That information would have been impossible to guess from perfect planning alone. I started seeking feedback loops in everything. Presentations. I shared rough drafts, products. I launched minimum viable versions and adjusted. Strategies. I tested the basics with small audiences before overthinking. Each imperfect action produced more insight, more clarity, and ultimately better outcomes than any perfectionist approach could have. This is the principle I call iteration superiority. Excellence rarely comes from one perfect act. It comes from cycles. Imperfect action, feedback, adjustment, repeat. Software shows this perfectly. Facebook's first version was clunky, incomplete, far from perfect. But by launching, they gained users, gathered feedback, and iterated towards something exceptional. I applied this to my life. Rough drafts shared, imperfect strategies tested, minimum viable versions launched. Each step felt risky, uncomfortable, but the results were undeniable. Speed matters too. In fast-moving environments, acting imperfectly often beats waiting for perfect conditions. I spent 3 months analyzing a business opportunity while a competitor launched in 3 weeks. My plan was perfect. Theirs was imperfect. Guess who won? They captured the market, iterated, and improved while I was still polishing a dream. Acting quickly with imperfect information is often far more valuable than waiting to be ready. And here's where it really hits. Imperfect action accelerates learning in ways perfect planning can't. That 6 days obsessing over the email taught me nothing. The 2 hours of real conversation after sending it taught me more than months of preparation ever could. Real experience has a velocity all its own. I call it learning through doing. You don't become a better speaker by studying endlessly. You speak. You don't become a better entrepreneur by theorizing. You start. And yes, it will be imperfect. That's the point. To escape the perfectionism trap, I created the Perfectionism Recovery Framework. Step 1. Separate perfect from adequate. Step 2. Time-box tasks to prevent endless tinkering. Step 3. Define good enough before starting. Step 4. Integrate feedback loops to improve iteratively. Step 5. Celebrate completion, not perfection. And the philosophy that changed everything? Strategic imperfection. Accept that imperfection isn't failure, it's a tool. Choose where perfection matters and where adequate is sufficient. Focus on the few things that really count, and let the rest be good enough. Because here's the secret. Every imperfect action compounds over time. Every adequate email sent builds action confidence. Every rough draft shared builds execution momentum. Every step forward, imperfect or not, creates a rhythm, a habit, a system that makes future actions easier and more effective. The perfectionism paradox resolves itself when you see this. Caring about quality doesn't require perfection. In fact, the highest quality outcomes often come from multiple cycles of imperfect action. You can aim for excellence while embracing imperfection at each step. 6 months later, the results were obvious. The collaboration from that one imperfect email produced tangible business value. Presentations given without perfect preparation led to speaking opportunities. Products launched before they felt ready, found traction, and improved. But the real transformation was internal. I became someone who could act decisively, iterate rapidly, and move forward without waiting for perfect conditions. Fear no longer froze me. Momentum replaced hesitation. Imperfect action became the engine of everything I accomplished. Success doesn't start when conditions are perfect. Success starts when you're done waiting. When you send the email, even if it's not perfect. When you start the project, even if it's rough. When you act, even if you're not fully ready. The world doesn't need your perfect work. It needs your work. Imperfect, unfinished, messy, real. Because imperfect action that exists is infinitely more valuable than perfect action that never leaves your drafts folder. That 6-day email taught me the truth. Perfectionism isn't about quality. It's about fear. And the cure isn't planning perfectly. It's acting imperfectly, consistently, relentlessly. Understanding that excellence is built through iteration, not flawless leaps. Success starts when you stop perfecting and start executing. When you embrace the mastery of imperfect action as the foundation of every great result.